What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin, presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pie Pizza. Finally on my menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I am your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT. Find me on Blue Sky at proant. No underscores there, just PROANT. In this episode of Disguised Coverage, we are roughly 1 month away from the start of Buffalo Bills training camp. And with that being said, as we start to move forward, wanted to set the table for the rest of this offseason conversation leading into training camp, which then leads into the preseason, which then leads into the regular season, by addressing several position groups on this Bills roster, on this Bills team, and essentially laying out the biggest or top or most important question at each of these position groups. Some of them we've talked about briefly throughout this offseason. Some of them we've alluded to, some we mentioned, but there are several position groups that have significant questions amongst this entire Buffalo Bills roster and within this Buffalo Bills team. Some of them are positions this team has worked on through year after year after year in the offseason. So some positions are newer ones that are kind of in flux or suddenly under the microscope after not being so for a long time. But either way, these position groups that we're going to dive into tonight, I think really headline a lot of where the focus will be from a training camp perspective. Roster battles, depth chart battles, who beats out who for this, who beats out who for that, and what it means, so on and so forth. So this episode is going to kind of set the table for some of the deeper, detailed discussions we have in the coming weeks leading up to training camp, and then obviously our coverage throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, then leading into the regular season. Apologies for not having some shows the past couple of weeks. Very busy with a lot of things going on in a positive way. I am still trying to make up, some of the episodes that I haven't done by doing some pre-recorded stuff, uploading it to the channel. As I get time for that, they will be uploaded, published, and communicated via Twitter and Blue Sky and all those other channels, platforms, anything and everything. In this episode, as we start to dive in, any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, theories, maxims, whatever you got on, the topic of this episode or anything in general regarding the Bills, NFL, whatever you got, feel free to put it up into the chat. We will dive into as many of those pieces as possible. I know we are in the doldrums of the off season, so I appreciate anyone tuning in live to this episode, joining me on this journey. And if you want to put some questions up into the live chat so I don't feel completely hopeless and alone, I would greatly appreciate you for that. Appreciate you, Bill, for being here and saying he already gave a thumbs up. Thumbs up are the lifeblood of these streams here on YouTube. So thank you to Bill for giving the thumbs up, and to anyone and everyone who drops a like or a thumbs up here on YouTube, whether you're watching live now, later, listening later, whatever have you. Your support is greatly appreciated, as is the support from all the folks listening on the audio-only platforms when this show gets uploaded after we finish live tonight. So without further ado, let us dive into it. And I'm going to start with a position group that I haven't talked too much about from a holistic perspective. I've talked about some players within this position group, but we're going to lead off with cornerback for the Buffalo Bills. And this, I guess, I don't even think I had kind of realized I had this position group in my mind already from a training camp perspective and from a preseason perspective. Some, position group that I wanted to watch, several players I wanted to keep an eye on, several storylines that are kind of baked into it, both on and off the field. But Max Hairston picking up an injury in minicamp is kind of somewhat of what thrust this position group into the forefront of my brain. In an ideal world, and that injury is not serious. We're not talking about Max Hairston missing any time. His season isn't in jeopardy. We're not talking about any of that. But it just, to kind of put you, a little peek into my brain of why this position group was on the forefront of my brain and why I want to lead off with it. In an ideal world, Max Hairston wins the corner 2 job outright. He is the starter. He is the prince that was promised at that position. The athleticism, the juice, the closing ability, things that the Bills really haven't had at the corner room, I should say. They tried to get more athletic and more juiced up when they drafted Kyrie, and that didn't work out. But again, in an ideal world, Max Hairston wins the corner 2 job outright. And if that happens, again, in an ideal world, we still have questions on the depth chart after him. But him getting banged up kind of put in the forefront of my mind of who steps in as CB2 if he goes down. And even within that, what does the rest of the depth chart look like at corner? So we play it out in an ideal world. Christian Benford, CB1, and not just CB1 for the Bills. I think he is still on an upward trajectory and blossoming into one of the better corners in the league. We talked about it on the show in the chat a couple episodes ago. I don't know where I rank him in terms of like corners in the league. I don't know if he's top 10 or where he funnels in, but there's a good chance that he really could solidify himself as a top 10 corner in this league after this season. He's a real quality player in almost every facet or box that you're looking to tick or check at the corner position. So you've got Benford at at 1, and then you've got Hairston at 2. And then everything after that, are we looking at Tre'Davious White as corner 3? Is Dane Jackson corner 3? Does Dorian Strong make this team? What happens to Jamarcus Ingram, who played well in the preseason last year, who also got some in-game action and some dime packages when the Bills were banged up at corner? He's got inside-outside versatility. He's got a physicality and an edge to him that he plays with that isn't really present amongst the rest of the corner grouping, the violence that he plays with. This grouping I find to be an interesting one because, again, if you're, for those of you playing at home, whether you're watching live now, watching later, listening later, whatever have you, I think most would agree, okay, cool. You trot out Benford and Hairston as your starting corners. That's what you want. But even if it's not Hairston, if one of them goes down, who do you want next stepping in? Like, who is the next guy up for you? Is it Trey? Is it Dane Jackson? Is it Dorian Strong? How confident are you in Dorian Strong being a rookie? How confident are you in Jamarcus Ingram? Do you want to see more of him? I just think this is an interesting position group after Christian Benford. Again, assuming Max Harrison wins this job. But essentially the question for me for this group is who wins CB3 and CB4? And overall, how many corners do they keep? I think you've got a legitimate opportunity for, again, Benford, Hairston, Trey, Dane Jackson, Dorian Strong, Jamarcus Ingram. You still got Daquan Hardy floating around a bit, who played well legitimately last year in camp, in the preseason, in the scrimmage, was cut by the Bills, but then brought back. Like there's quality and from a depth perspective within this entire CB room. But that question of who steps in, should Hairston go down? Should Christian Benford go down? I think it's really interesting. And so kind of seeing who wins that CB3 and CB4 job, I think is enough of a question in and of itself for this corner grouping. But more importantly, whoever wins the CB3 job is next man up should anything happen to Benford or Hairston. Or, again, no jinx, not putting bad juju out there. Should Hairston not perform well in camp or the preseason, does this open the door for the reliability and the known quantity that we know the Bills value at corner and have them say, you know what, Hairston needs a little more seasoning. Let's give the reins to Trey White or Dane Jackson, who neither are the sexiest. Trey is probably sexier than Dane at this point, but not the all-pro that he was. But they have a known quantity there, the responsibility there. They understand where to be and how to get there and when to be there. Their teammates are going to trust them to be in the right place at the right time, and so are the coaches. I don't think it's crazy that all of a sudden, one of them kind of bumps up if Hairston struggles a little bit. So I think it's a very interesting kind of position group to look at, aside from the headline, which was Max Hairston, first-round pick, speed, juice, athleticism, recovery speed, closing ability, all of that. So yeah, I wanted to lead off with that group because the Hairston injury, again, triggered it a bit for me in terms of putting this group into the forefront and wondering what it looks like holistically down the depth chart, but also by extension, who would step in should anything happen to Hairston or into Benford. CT, appreciate you being here. Kendra's in the chat saying, go Bills, go Bills. Kendra, appreciate you being here. Comment here, or question here, I should say. Oh, so what's our ceiling, in your opinion? If we don't get to the Super Bowl, is it a failure of a season? I think so. I'll start with the second part of this question first. If the Bills don't get to the Super Bowl, is it a failure of a season? I don't think so, just because I don't care how good your team is. It's just so hard to win a Super Bowl. The odds of any one team winning the Super Bowl or one of the other 31 teams in the NFL winning it, the odds are just significantly in favor of one of the other 31 teams. It's just so hard. You have to stay healthy. Your schedule has to fall the right way. You have to be playing good ball at the right time. And so much of the league is matchup driven. You might be the best team. Like, legitimately, you could be, and I'm not just saying from the Bills' perspective, you could be the best team in the league or the best team in your conference, but there might be a certain team or matchup that you struggle against or struggle with, and maybe that's who you get matched up in the divisional round and you get bounced. Like, it's so tough. I think for me, a successful season, bare minimum, is winning the division again. I think being a Final Four team is a success. If you get to the championship round, I think that's a success. I do think from a ceiling perspective, I do think this is a team that can compete for the Super Bowl. Again, there's so much to be kind of fleshed out for this team, for the rest of the league, kind of really know who they are and what they are. I will say, and I hope this doesn't make anybody too mad, but I'm still kind of in the same position that I was last year, where if everything clicks for any one team, I still think the Baltimore Ravens are the best team in the AFC. Just looking at what they are offensively and defensively. If you take, and again, we'll just separate the NFC right now. We're talking about going to the Super Bowl. If you're just looking at the AFC and how these teams are built and their rosters, and if you look at, like, if each team, if everything goes right for them, where do they rank? I think Baltimore is number one. I think the Bills are two. Just kind of put that in perspective, which makes it such a fun opening night game in week one on Sunday Night Football between Bills and Ravens. But I think making the Final Four, so in this case, the championship, is a success. So I wouldn't say, not getting the Super Bowl is a failure. And I do think the ceiling is getting to the Super Bowl and winning it. I think this team has the ability. I think they're built schematically for the league now to have success in the league. They're obviously very good at the quarterback position. If they can just get a couple other guys to step up or some pieces to fall in their favor from a positive domino perspective, I do think this is a team that could go to the Super Bowl and potentially win it, depending on, obviously, who they play, so on like that. Bill says, niche conversation. Seems like a dearth of special teamers from the skill group that aren't returner team guys. Excited about the coaching upgrade, but who will be the specialists? I think this is a very good question. Even just starting with the returners, like, do they just go the safe route and just say, hey, we're going to go with Ray Davis and Ty Johnson as our kick returners and Khalil Shakir as the punt returner? Or is Shakir too valuable now? Does Brandon Codrington get a roster spot because of what he is as a returner? He's not going to give you anything as a corner spot, but is he good enough of a returner to just make the roster because of his return ability? And then, that special teams piece. Is it Spector sticking around? Is it Joe Andreessen? Is it someone else who kind of funnels through? Does Jamarcus Ingram step up and grab a special teams roster spot? I do think it's interesting. And then even going all the way down to the kicker conversation. Does Bass continue to stay steady like he was from pretty much the middle of 2024 on through the end? Or does he start to get the yips again and show the inconsistencies that he had to start last season? Who wins the punter battle? Punter is all of a sudden kind of like ugly and murky, even though this team doesn't really punt a lot anyway. I do think that, and we know special teams value holds a lot of weight when it comes to making the roster for the Bills in Sean McDermott's eyes and the eyes of the coaching staff. So I think that's a very good question. Oh, I appreciate this. Comment says, Michigan. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. John says, I'm assuming this is based on the time of when you said this, John, I'm assuming this is in reference to if Hairston or Benford go down, who would you like to step in? And John's answer is Trey White or Dorian Strong. And then he follows that up by saying, I think Dane Jackson is practice squad. I've heard Corey Couch has played well so far. I talked about Corey Couch a little bit last year. He's from the University of Miami. I am a Hurricanes guy that is all about the U. I would love Corey Couch to be able to make an impact. I do think he's more inside and slot and nickel based than he is kind of making anything on the outside. But physical, violent, some man and match capability. I'm always down to watch, a guy that I liked in college play come training camp preseason time, but I do think it would be a little tough for him to kind of crack a roster spot. James says, what roster spots are affected pre and post Hoyt and Ogunjobi suspensions, providing no injuries? I'm actually going to get into this as we speak about defensive tackle and edge in this episode. So I think that's a very, very good question. But aside from those immediate ones, I would say what roster spots are affected. Maybe you get an extra corner who makes the roster, maybe an extra linebacker that makes the roster, maybe an extra wide receiver. I would look at those three first, maybe offensive line as well. But I would start with those top three of corner, linebacker, and wide receiver. and kind of seeing. And then, maybe even safety, depending on how you classify Jordan Hancock. I would look at those, they could potentially keep somebody there knowing that Hoyt and Ogunjobi are each going to miss 6 games. And that's obviously outside of, keeping an extra defensive tackle, keeping an extra edge. K. Moore, he says, getting a Super Bowl is playing good enough games for 3 or 4 straight games at the end of the season. It's so much of it. I hate saying this because it sounds like we were just saying that because the Bills haven't won one. You got to get hot at the right time. You got to be healthy. It's funny how often, most of the teams that win the Super Bowl are often the healthiest teams come playoff time. And you just got to have the board fall the right way. Again, it's so much of this league is matchups driven and matchup focused in season, but especially in the playoffs where, and even going to, if the weather doesn't fall your way the right way. I mean, even look at the Rams. Like the Rams took it to Philly and almost beat Philly. They had a chance to beat Philly in the snow. I don't know if you're the Rams or if you're a Rams fan, are you sitting here going, man, if there wasn't snow like that, we would have beaten Philly. Do you feel that type of way? There's so many variables that go into winning a Super Bowl and getting there that it's just so hard for me to sit there and say, like, if you don't make the Super Bowl or if you don't win it, the season's a failure. Unless your team is completely loaded at just every spot, and I don't think the Bills are, and I don't know how many teams are really in the league from my perspective and quantifying that. It's really hard to say that, and there's just so many variables. So, yeah, that's a fair point. Bill says you beat up Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman at the line of scrimmage and send a missile at Lamar every play for the first game, then change it up with the suspended guys in the playoffs. Could be. The Ravens are just so tough with you have to, from an offensive perspective for the Ravens, you just have to combat so much. Like, do you stop Lamar's legs? Do you stop Derrick Henry and Justice Hill? Do you stop Lamar's arm and his pocket ability? Like, and even that with his arm, like, do you stop him from making throws on the run? Do you want to keep him hemmed in the pocket? He's a better pocket passer and quarterback than he gets credit for. I know he is prone to some mistakes and, often high profile ones, but I think so many of the errors in his game have gotten blown up, especially by the Bills fan base. And just that Ravens offense is just so devastating from a conceptual standpoint, the scope of what they're able to get to and how efficient Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator, is at putting players in the right positions and setting them up for success and putting them in the most advantageous role and getting the offense to function from a cohesive standpoint. If they had a stronger offensive line, they'd be even scarier. But just, what they can do from a personnel standpoint and alignment standpoint to pass the run, they're terrifying. And then now defensively, if everybody stays healthy, I love Malachi Starks at Georgia. And now they're looking at a Malachi Starks and Kyle Hamilton safety tandem, which legitimately could be one of the best in the league. They signed Jair Alexander. If Jair Alexander stays healthy, and now you're looking at your outside corners of, Jair and Wiggins, and then you still use Humphrey on the outside or bump him inside as the nickel. Like, they could have the best secondary in the league. You have arguably the best linebacker in football in Roquan Smith. You've got talent on that defensive line as well. Like, Matabike is one of the best at his position. They're a unit on both sides. Kent says, Trey White scares me. I don't think he can run with receivers down the field anymore. That's fair. I don't think he ever really, not to knock him, really ever could. He makes his living so much on technique and footwork and being precise with his movements. I think even more so now with age and miles on the tires and the injuries that he's had. I really just want to see how he looks come preseason and in this defense and in this role. I think he was better for the Ravens that he got some credit for, albeit in very small sample size, and really just in a dime third down type of role for them after he got cut from the Rams. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have for CB3. Like, is it Trey? Is it Dane Jackson because of the known quantity? Or does Dorian Strong make a push, given he ticks a lot of their archetype boxes? And he's also got, youth and athleticism on his side compared to Dane and Trey, even though he's not the most athletic guy himself. Charles says that the defense folds again in the playoffs. That's an L. I mean, obviously, if the defense folds, or Allen has to play out of his mind. Like, I think kind of lost in that Chiefs game with how it ended was Allen did not start out very good. He was very skittish those first couple drives. I thought they'd pivot to the run game earlier than they did. I mean, I thought they pivot to the run game more in general. I still wish, Cook got the ball more in that game. I wish they started running it with Cook and Davis earlier to let Allen settle in, especially with how shaky he looked in the first quarter, especially those first two drives. Again, everything just has to go right. Everything just has to click. It's tough. It's tough, man. Kay Moore says the Ravens have the best A game in the AFC, probably the league, but they forget what their A game is in the playoffs. I think that's so well said. That's so spot on. I really do feel like on paper, they're like the best roster, and have kind of made that case the past couple of years, at least in the AFC. And yeah, it's like, man, if they click and things go right and they play their A game, who's beating them? And they just find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. Or it's not even like they play their A game and then also like shoot themselves in the foot devastatingly, or they're just completely off their game. It's just, that's another example though too. Like they're a quality team year in and year out and have been for years, but they just don't put it together in the right way at the right time in the playoffs and they get bounced. Or you have crazy things happen to them, like what happened against Kansas City 2 years ago with the Flowers fumble on the goal line after he got stopped on that big gain. It's just, things got to click in the right way at the right time. I mean, you look at Baltimore last year, like you have a couple Lamar mistakes against the Bills, but you have a drop from Mark Andrews, the crazy fumble from Mark Andrews. Like there's just, the margin for error is so small, and the Ravens, just find a way to kind of lose the game for themselves, even though they're so terrifying. Yeah, it's nuts. James says first game against the Ravens is huge. Absolutely. I'm very excited for it. John says, I heard Elijah Moore is a possible returner. Could be. We're going to talk about receiver in a little bit. John also talks about Tyrell Shavers working on playing special teams and could be the Bills' sixth receiver, and then mentions that Trey White has good leadership. I agree. Claude says, on paper, Baltimore and Philly are head and shoulders above everyone else. Yeah, that's probably fair. That is probably fair. I also think the Lions on paper have a really good team. But there's just questions now with the new offensive coordinator. Bill says the A game is mentally exceptional. Josh and Lamar versus Brady and Mahomes physically. I don't know if I'm kind of reading this correctly or incorrectly. I mean, yeah, I still think Lamar's performances from a negative perspective get blown up too much. And again, I know against the Bills, the most recent game, the interception, which the Bills did a good job enforcing, I think he tried to do too much on the fumble and essentially kind of did it to himself more than it was done to him, although the Bills crossed him up. So that's, tip of the cap to them. But I still look at, when push came to shove, down and needing a score in Buffalo, in the cold, in the snow, Lamar marched them right down the field with ease and kind of didn't make the best throw to Mark Andrews for that tying 2-point conversion. But Andrew still should have caught it. I mean, he put it in his hands, and there's a lot of things that didn't go right in that Ravens offense in general was unstoppable in the second half. They just ran through the Bills, passed through the Bills. They did whatever they want aside from those turnovers that changed the game. Pretty, a lot of momentum swinging plays in that one for sure. All right. Corey saying, what level of pass rush snaps and expected sack totals for rookie D lineman Sanders, Jackson, and what's the big guy, Deion Walker? Starting safety predictions, beginning of the season and week 10. Corey, good news for you is I'm going to answer several of those questions as we keep discussing more position groups in this episode. I'll start off with, let's go into defensive tackle right now because it's actually, no, I'll start with wide receiver because it's a simpler conversation. But Corey, all of your questions will be answered as I go through several more position groupings in this next little bit. So I like where your head is at and I appreciate your question. Wide receiver is another one. And the reason I wanted to lead off with corner and wide receiver, I have some other position groups we're going to talk about in this episode, but we have talked about them at different levels and to varying degrees throughout the rest of this earlier in this offseason. So I didn't want to, bang that drum too much again, or lead off with that drum, I should say. But wide receiver, the biggest question, or the top question for me here at this position group, is what do they get from everyone not named Khalil Shakir? I think at this point, his role and his usage are very much established and very much known. And he got paid like it this offseason. But the rest of this group is question marks. And I say that from a plural perspective because I think it's question marks across pretty much every other wide receiver in terms of role, expectation, usage. We have an idea of the fits, the roles, and the usages, but I really do think it's unknown quantities for most of the guys who are most likely to make the roster, I should say. Curtis Samuel, for example, we saw flashes of what he can be down the stretch, but can he stay healthy? I am still going to maintain and stand on what I saw in training camp last year when I went to training camp 3 out of those first 4 days. He was used as that adjuster, that move guy all around the offense. Brady was using him to create horizontal leverage, leverage vertically. He was stretching the defense. He was getting stuff in the flats and the low intermediate. They were getting stuff to him by design. They were using him to kind of drain coverage, but also get him into advantageous matchups against different body types. He was cooking in training camp, and then he gets that toe injury. They don't shut him down. He plays through it, but the effectiveness just was not there for the majority of the year. And then coincidentally or not, as he gets healthier down the stretch and into the playoffs, he starts to play better. He has that big touchdown against the Broncos in the playoffs. He performed well against the Chiefs in Buffalo in their first the first meeting of the year in the regular season. But can he stay healthy? And then we have Josh Palmer. What does Palmer offer in that Amari Cooper role from last year? Can Palmer be the one-on-one winner that they need him to be? Can he be that guy who beats man coverage? Can he be that guy who can win at the release and win in the stem? How much of a vertical threat is he? He's not a pure burner, not a ton of speed. He's not slow, but he's not some guy that just strikes fear into CBs because he's so fast and he can get on you so quickly and run by you. He wins more with deception, good stem work, and within the scheme of a play. So what do you get from him overall from an effectiveness standpoint? Keon Coleman. What do you get from Keon Coleman in year two? Such a huge, huge question mark for this year and really going forward. I don't know if this is positive or negative, but I'm in a similar boat with Keon as I was last year, where I still think the ceiling is high for him, and I still think the floor is low for him. I think you can make a case that, Keon Coleman 2-3 years from now could be a top end wide receiver 2. I also think you could make the case that 2 or 3 years from now, Keon Coleman is fighting for a roster spot and, is signs a bunch of 1-year deals for the next 4 or 5 years after that, because everybody thinks they can be the one to finally tap into him and get him to reach that ceiling. I think the outcome is filled with a varied amount of possibilities and likelihoods for Keon Coleman. And that's a big question with this grouping, right? Because you also, too, do need someone to step into that Matt Collins role from a run blocking perspective. Who's going to do that dirty work? Who's going to fit and insert on duo? Who is going to block on all these runs with pass tags and the RPO bubbles and everything that they like to work? Who is going to offer that? Collins, I think, played a bigger role from doing the dirty work and just being a glue guy schematically than he gets credit for. Everything was so much like culture and he's fun. He doesn't wear shoes. Haha. And look what he wears to the games. But he was more of a glue guy for the offense than I think he got credit for. Keon Coleman's got the body type and the size to be that type of blocker, but can he be that type of blocker that Hollins was from a technique perspective, from knowing your assignment perspective, from a violence and a physicality perspective? I think that's even just that is a lot to put on Coleman's plate, let alone the actual receiver, quote unquote, receiver stuff in terms of route running, stem work, release work, and just the precision and the craft that he needed to hone more at the wide receiver position. And then you've got Elijah Moore, who I really do think is the wild card of this group. Wild card meaning, if you told me Elijah Moore finishes as, the second most productive receiver after Khalil Shakir for the Bills, I wouldn't think that's crazy. And I don't think that means like anything bad. Or that doesn't mean that like, oh, well, they punted on the season and that's why. If you told me, he's used sparingly as wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 4, I believe it. If you tell me he doesn't make the team, I can see it. But I do think Elijah Moore is going to contribute meaningful snaps to the Bills. I don't know how much from a usage perspective. I think a lot of it's going to depend on the factors above him, right? Like, what is Keon Coleman and how healthy can Curtis Samuel be? I think in an ideal world for the Bills, Elijah Moore is like wide receiver 5, maybe moonlighting as wide receiver 4, or used in certain packages with certain looks, or having more of a specified role within the offense. Just given how they are a run first team built on condensed formations and reduced formational width and being able to marry the run and the pass. But I am interested to see what Elijah Moore can be. But literally, I think those are significant questions and legitimate questions for each person not named Khalil Shakir. We know what Shakir is. We know what Shakir does. Also, I don't want to downplay Shakir and make that seem like, okay, that means Shakir can't get any better. It doesn't mean he's plateaued. Shakir could continue to ascend and could still be on an upward trajectory. I just want to kind of put that out there. But we know what the floor is. We know what the baseline value and usage is for Khalil Shakir. We don't know that for anybody. Palmer hasn't been in this offense. Elijah Moore hasn't been in this offense. Keon Coleman just has such a wide array on the spectrum of possibilities of what he could be from floor to ceiling. And then you've got Curtis Samuel, who can't stay healthy. And that's not a Bills thing. That's just a thing throughout his career in the NFL thus far. So we'll see. Going to comments here. What's up, Pete? Pete says it's a good point on Samuel. He's been forgotten this offseason, but they really didn't have him a year ago. That is correct. And you know what? I do feel a little bad for him because I think it was turf toe that he had, and turf toe sucks. And in general, but especially for a receiver who all the cutting and planning and movement that you have to do, you could just tell he was not right. And he tried to play through it, and it really didn't do him any favors as far as usage and production and in the eyes of the fan base. But again, like I mentioned, and as you alluded to, as he got healthier, we saw the speed, we saw the stride, we saw some of the playmaking ability. I don't think he's ever going to be like a true wide receiver 1, or honestly, maybe even a true wide receiver 2. But I think he is a guy that can be a high wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2. The guy who, maybe one game he has 6 catches for 115 yards, but most of the time you're looking for like 3 to 5 catches, anywhere from 35 to maybe 60 or 70 yards if he breaks one. But I do think the schematic potential is there. The motions, all the pre-snap movement and the shifting, how functional he can be in and out of bunches, and just when you get him going before the snap. And not to mention his most productive year in the NFL came with Joe Brady at the helm in Carolina. They bring him here last year. I am still going to maintain that they had a plan for him last year that was unable to be put into fruition because of his injury. And I do think they try to get back to that this year. It wouldn't surprise me if he balled out the first several weeks and everybody's going, wow, Curtis Samuel kind of came out of nowhere. But if you really looked, there are some breadcrumbs that are there from last year in training camp and from last year once he started to get healthy a bit. James says, McBean seems to think Keon has responded well to offseason motivation. I expect big things from Coleman. I hope so. I would really like – Coleman was my wide receiver 9 last year, I believe. But I would really love, I post a lot of clips across the league, and anytime I post anything from a rookie wide receiver from last year, everybody's just like, man, Keon sucks. Wish Keon was good as Lad McConkey. Or, man, what a play by A.D. Mitchell. Keon Coleman can't do that. Man, what a play by Xavier Worthy. Keon Coleman can't do that. I would like him to ball out and have a good year, just so that would stop, but also just, for the sake of the Bills. I don't know what to think. My expectations for him are so, again, like I mentioned, I'm in the same boat as I was last year. And if I bake it down into just this season, if you told me that he balled out and was the legitimate second best wide receiver after Khalil Shakir, I could believe you. If you told me that he ends up being like 4th or 5th on the depth chart at the end of this year, I could believe it. And again, I don't think that means he's terrible for the future. Just do think he has so much to work on from a refinement standpoint and from a precision standpoint and technique standpoint that it just makes his ceiling and floor, like I said, just such a wide array of outcomes along that spectrum. Claude says, I'm assuming 5 wide receivers unless someone goes crazy in training camp. Shakir, Coleman, Palmer, Samuel, and more. I'm hoping Prather. I'm guessing Shavers. Yeah, I'm going with 5. Like I mentioned earlier with that question, I do think with Hoyt and Ogunjobi having the suspensions, I think there's an opportunity for a 6th receiver to get a spot. I would think it is between, I think Shavers has the inside track. Prather, given his size and frame and skill set and traits, I think has a chance just because he is a bit of a unique guy in that room, or at least how the top of the room is constructed. And then maybe you have an outside chance with Laviska Shenault or maybe KJ Hamler just because of how fast he is. I know they liked what Jalen Virgil did last year, just more of as a blocker and the motion guy. But I think that's a fair thought. Bill says student body right with Jackson Hawes and Anderson crushing with 2 go routes with Elijah and Curtis. Who's with me? I'll take it even further. I mentioned it on an episode earlier this offseason. Give me 13 personnel and jumbo at the same time. So give me Dalton Kincaid split out wide as the quote-unquote X receiver. So he's outside by himself as a quasi-X, and we are condensed with our 5 offensive linemen. And also attached to the line of scrimmage is Alec Anderson, Dawson Knox, and Jackson Hawes. And just let me mash the hell out of defenses and then just mix and play action when I want, or see who's covering Kincaid one-on-one and let him kind of work. Kent says, I never liked the Coleman pick, but I thought he did a good job blocking downfield last year. I think he's a willing guy. I do think he's willing. For me, it's more the question of being assignment sound and the technique. it like 70% of blocking is willingness, right? But you do have to be in the right spot at the right time, knowing your assignment. Body positioning is so important. Hands, hand usage, hand placement, your base, everything being solid. So I think the willingness is there. For me, it's just more of the question of the body positioning, the technique, and being assignment sound. John says, I heard Palmer and Moore did great in OTAs and minicamp. I heard the same thing, which I think is very encouraging. James says Coleman is his own worst critic, which is awesome to see, right? You want to see from a guy who needs development, who has a high ceiling but a low floor. You want him to be his own worst critic. So that way it gives you some hope that, he's willing to kind of put that work in to be the player that you want him to be. John says Coleman came to camp with 20 pounds more muscle, and Coleman is practicing with Josh before training camp. 20 pounds more muscle. That's a lot. But I believe you for this for the time now. Number one CT Bills fan says, I'm going to be really excited to see the defensive line in the second half of the season. I like that comment because that'll allow us to transition to the defensive line. And we're going to go right into defensive tackle. Another position group that I think has, and again, I'm not going to bang this drum too much. I've talked about defensive tackle on edge a lot this offseason, even as, most recently, as the episode I did on the day that the Joey Bosa injury news broke, and I talked about how important he was and what he means to the ceiling of the edge grouping, but the defensive line as a whole. But I do think there is, one large question and a couple of sub questions that factor off of the defensive tackle question, or the big question for defensive tackle, that I should say, also ties into Corey's question earlier from the chat. First one anyway, that was on the rookie defensive lineman, one of them being TJ Sanders, the other one being Landon Jackson, which we'll talk about when we get to edge. I think the big question for defensive tackle, I think it's one big question, but I think it splits off into two parts because of the Larry Ogunjobi suspension, which really muddies this position grouping, just like the Michael Hoyt suspension muddies the edge grouping. So the first big question that, again, splits off into two parts for the defensive tackle grouping for me is, who is the odd man out, is the first question for me. And then the second question, kind of that's an offshoot of that, how does Larry Ogunjobi's suspension change things or impact things or open anything up for anyone? Again, we've talked about it a bit throughout this offseason. I think when no one is suspended, I think you're looking at a top four at defensive tackle of Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Larry Ogunjobi, and TJ Sanders. I think there's a chance for a fifth to be on the roster. Could be Dwayne Carter, could be Deion Walker. We'll see what Walker's health looks like. But Larry Ogunjobi, as we know, or if you don't know, I'm sorry to break this news to you, Larry Ogunjobi suspended for the first 6 games of the season. So he's out. So we're talking opening night in Buffalo against the Baltimore Ravens. You're looking at Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, TJ Sanders, and then what else are we looking at defensive tackle? So for me, who the odd man out is in reference or relation to once Ogunjobi is back from suspension, or if all things were equal. But even with Ogunjobi out, like we talked about a bit, so you've got Ed, you've got Daquan, you've got Sanders. Is it Carter, Walker, and Zion Logue? Is it just another guy to make 4? Is it 5 guys? Are there 6 guys that are in contention, but it's really only 4 or 5 because of the suspension? I just want to know who the odd man out is at defensive tackle. And what frustrates me about the group is the redundancy of the skill set they leaned into and just how vulnerable it makes them against the run from a displacement standpoint. Again, I'm not going to go into it too much because I've talked about it a bunch this offseason, but they really leaned into the penetration and the gap shooting aspect from the interior, leaning into pass rush more than run defense and displacement limitation. So they're banking on Ed and Larry Ogunjobi and TJ Sanders just shooting gaps. I think you're going to see a lot of stunts inside. I think you're seeing a lot of games inside. I think you're going to see twists. I think you're going to see pirate stunts. I think you're going to see a lot of, run blitzes, run stunts, slants, crashes, a lot of games up front against the run and the pass. I think they're going to lean into havoc creation more so than, guys who can hold up against a double team, guys who can drop the knee or reduce their surface area or, be able to kind of lean in and play with leverage and lean and mitigate displacement vertically and or horizontally. I think Baltimore is going to be a big test early on because they want to displace you all over the place. They want to push you around. They're going to use gap scheme runs and take advantage of guys who get upfield and try to shoot gaps. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Bills kind of combat. Yeah, as Claude says, they're still going to have the same weakness versus Baltimore! Exclamation point, exclamation point. So frustrating. Yes, they are. I think a lot of teams also have that weakness against Baltimore. But yes, the Bills do have that weakness. They're just going to have to beat it by they're going to have to get up the field faster and shoot gaps faster than Baltimore can pick them up and move them out of the picture. And it's just going to kind of be a bit of a game of Russian roulette with that, right? Like who gets who first? Do the Bills get you or do the Bills get gotten? Like, and that's what it's going to be. And that's a little nerve wracking, but that's the bed they made and they got to lie in it. Bill says, what's wrong with having 7-3 text? Yeah. And then the little emoji there, disappointment. Yeah, I get it. So we'll see what this group looks like come, full circle. I think we know what it looks like from an archetype standpoint, from a philosophy standpoint. I talked a little bit about what it looks like schematically, but really is just who's the odd man out. Do they keep 5 defensive tackles? If they do, who's at the bottom there? Is it Dwayne Carter over Deion Walker? Obviously, Walker's health is so important. That back and that spinal defect or whatever it is that he had, I wrote it down and talked about it so much during the offseason for draft prep and evaluation, and I've forgotten about it now. But is his back good? Is his spine good? Can he redistribute some of that weight and change his body composition a little bit? 1, to help that back, but also 2, just help his mobility, because he is a big guy, but he does have a lean lower body and thinner type of legs. So you don't want him to carry all this weight up top. I think Walker's path to success in the NFL is filled with a lot of variables and isn't as straightforward or as hopeful as it's kind of being made out to be, I should say. But if they can get him healthy, if they can change his body composition a little bit, I think there's an opportunity for him to be defensive tackle 5 or defensive tackle 4. And then Dwayne Carter, man, just somebody who was very ineffective last year against the run and in the pass, had some nice flashes, kind of got caught in between roles, in between weight. After night 1, when the Bills select Hairston, it's like, oh, we think we're going to have him play more of a 1-tech type of role. And then all of a sudden they draft, he's going to be like kind of the other 1-tech. And then they take TJ Sanders and the role kind of changes for him. It just makes you feel like he's the guy that is kind of like the Michael Scott gift from The Office, or the episode from The Office with just like snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap. Like I wonder what type of plan they have him on, what the focal point is for him, what his role will be. I think he's the odd man out if Walker can be healthy, but I do think Walker's health is a significant variable and red flag, and I could see him being put on the pup or not really even playing much this year, and him being more of a year 2 kind of guy. So yeah, we'll see. I think Carter they're going to use to try and be a bit of a 3 and a bit of a 1, which I think is a disservice to him, because he is built to be more of a 3 and a leaner 3 where he can penetrate and attack. So having him play a little heavier, asking him to take on double teams, asking him to play more of a 1-tech role, I don't think it sets him up for success, which is another whole talking point about this position group. But yeah, so I think it really starts with who the odd man out is. Obviously, the Ogunjobi suspension changes things, but how does it impact the grouping? And does somebody step up? Who knows? Maybe, Sanders balls out as defensive tackle 3, and maybe Dwayne Carter is amazing as defensive tackle 4, or Deion Walker is healthy and good, and he's defensive tackle 4. And you're like, man, they don't even need Ogunjobi back. Like, where does he fit in? Maybe you don't even want to mess things up. Maybe everything clicks and works how they want it to. So I do think there are some questions for that grouping. Want to go? James says, if Walker is healthy, he could be the steal of the draft. You know what? I don't think that's a crazy notion. I just think if he's healthy is such a big variable. I also, even when he was healthier, in specifically referencing the 2023 tape before the back injury really consumed him like it did in 2024, I didn't love his tape all that much in 2023. I think he plays high. Again, a lot of it is due to his size and frame, right? But he plays high, he gets displaced, and then his thin frame with the larger upper body doesn't really do him favors in terms of being able to kind of hold his ground and not get pushed around. That's also why I think he needs to change his body composition. I think it's not just health. I think it's body reshaping and body recomposition that he needs to undergo and engage in. But Dude's got size and frame, and he moves really well on his feet. He's light on his feet, which is both a positive and a negative for that position. And a bit of a unicorn. So kind of just wait and see and hope. Pete says it's a problem that we're again needing so many defensive linemen to have good years that they didn't have last year. Not sure how many hits we can realistically expect from new additions or improvements internally. I think that's very well said. No notes. Bob says, looking at the roles, do you take the cap situation into consideration? The Bills are right around the cap, if not over. They still need to sign TJ and have in-season operating expenses. I take it into consideration from the perspective of adding new players, but they'll be fine. They're fine from a cap perspective in terms of signing TJ Sanders. And then they could always move some stuff around with relative ease if they need in-season operating expenses. But I think it's a very good question, Bob. And I like that. I like that. Follow-up from Bob says, do they take a chance of releasing Daquan Jones or AJ Epinesa? Daquan, I doubt. AJ Epinesa, I think, could if Hoyt wasn't suspended. Or maybe they look to trade him in like week 5 or 6 or 4, whenever the trade deadline starts to fall, and as Hoyt is coming back. Daquan, I'm going to say I think is a very low chance. AJ, I'm also doubtful of, but I do think has a higher chance than Daquan. I think Daquan's like a 5% chance or much closer to 0. AJ, I feel like Epinesa has maybe like a 35, 40% chance of getting traded. Maybe 30 to 35% chance, I'll say. I think that's very fair. Oh, James says trade deadline is early November. Yep, that's fair. So Hoyt should have some time to get accustomed to the team and the lineup, and maybe someone becomes expendable. I was going to say expensible. That's not a word. Expendable at the edge position or anywhere. And maybe one of those guys is AJ Epinesa. Bill says maybe Walker could be a great goal line fullback. The problem is he just plays so high. Like I just see him running into the line, standing straight up. And if anything, he's going to gum up the works for whoever they give the ball to. But I think it will be fun from a chaos perspective. And because of that, I'm all for it. Some people just want to watch them. Some men just want to watch the world burn. This face of bear says Baltimore is a problem for everyone. Yeah, I do think that's fair, but I do think certain teams are able to combat them better than others. And the Bills they're very much, I think they're more of a problem for the Bills type of defensive design than they are for most, but they are, like I did mention, they are a problem for pretty much everyone and have been for years because they're a unicorn type of offense. But as Lamar has grown, as the weapons have gotten better, the addition of Todd Monken as offensive coordinator, yeah, they can just put every defense in hell. But particularly from a ground perspective, yeah, they're not an ideal matchup for the Bills. But again, they're not an ideal matchup for most. But I think the Bills more so than others. Ralph says AJ is Bosa insurance. And John Roberts says, I read Dwayne will be 3 tech and 1 tech depth. Yep. That's mention that as well. Good comment. Liking from the chat. Liking it. All right. So we'll stay on the defensive line. Let's go to edge. Talked about it a bit already in this episode. I have a similar question at edge that I did at wide receiver, and that's the big question for me here. But just replace Khalil Shakir with Greg Rousseau. So the big question for me at edge is, what do they get from everyone not named Greg Rousseau? And similar to wide receiver, I think you have question marks down the depth chart of edge. And I'm not going to talk about Bosa too much because I spent a whole episode on Bosa when he got injured earlier this month. So if you want details on that conversation, scheme, and individual skill set and traits, go back into that episode. Not to plug that or be like, hey, I already did this, but I just don't want to bog down too much of the same kind of conversation I've already had. But long story short, can Joey Bosa stay healthy? Like I talked about in that episode, I think the ceiling of the edge grouping is tied to Joey Bosa. There's a possibility that Greg Rousseau takes another jump and becomes, edge one from a pass rush perspective. I don't think he's there now. I think he's one of the best run defending edges and one of the best run defending defensive linemen in all of football. But as a pass rusher, I still think he's an edge too. I think he's more of a Robin that needs a Batman as a pass rusher, or, a B plus guy or a B guy as a rusher that needs multiple B pluses around him. Bosa, I think I'm talking a bit on both sides of my mouth here, but Bosa is their best chance to having a true edge one as a pass rusher. But he has injury concerns. But even when he's played and been injured, he's still been productive. So you can kind of mitigate his snaps a la Von Miller. And if he's healthy, I think he's the edge one as a pass rusher coming off the edge, and he's going to be a great fit and well worth the signing. Even if he's banged up, I still think he will be effective. I just don't know how much of a true edge one he's going to be. He's also a good run defender as an edge, but you don't need that on this team given Rousseau and Epinesa and Landon Jackson and Hoyt when he comes back from suspension. You don't need more run defense at the edge spot. You've already got that in spades on this Bills team. And with what you need from a pass rush perspective, mitigate his snaps, mitigate the contact, keep him healthy, keep him fresh. But I do think he's very important for this team because he impacts the ceiling of this grouping. He has the best chance to be edge one and be the Batman to Rousseau's Robin. And if Rousseau does take a jump and becomes more of a Batman himself, then you have two Batmans, and that's awesome. So that's Bosa. AJ Epinesa, I think, is the next question. Like, what is he built for? 2 years ago, he was very, very efficient as a pass rusher. Last year, we saw drops in pass rush production and efficiency, but he was legitimately a very good run defender last year. What he did on early downs, what he did schematically, and even stats from a stops perspective and percentage perspective, he was a good run defender pairing with Greg Rousseau. But what do you get from AJ Epinesa? Is he early down run defense? Can he be more of a complete 3-down type of edge? Do you get anything from him as a pass rusher? Does he step up as a pass rusher again, but take a step back or down as a run defender? Like, what are you getting from AJ Epinesa? And then Landon Jackson, rookie, what are you getting from him? Javon Solomon, some flashes last year, but even though he's going into year 2, he's still pretty much a rookie. You haven't had a lot of sample size or snap share for him to really know what to expect from him. And then you've got Michael Hoyt, who has that 6-game suspension. Does his absence open the door for anyone when he comes back? What do you get from him? Do they use him as more of a traditional edge? Do they use him as more of that spinner role or in that spinner type of role that the Rams used him in, like the Packers used Clay Matthews in back in the day where, he might be an edge, he might be an A gap, he might be off ball, he's dropping into coverage, he's rushing, he's the spiker on stunts and games, he's looping, like you don't know what he's going to do. Do they use him that way, or do they need to use him as a traditional edge because they're not getting production at that spot? And in conjunction with Bosa, if Bosa misses time in the first 6 games, that opens up the door even further for someone to step up at edge. Honestly, that's a bit of a nightmare for me right now because Hoyt's already gone those 6 games. If Bosa misses any time, that means you're looking at a top 4 of Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Javon Solomon, Landon Jackson. Like, that's your top 4 at edge. I don't think that's good enough to get the job done early on. Like, you need more at that spot. But the question all starts from, again, what do they get from everyone not named Greg Rousseau? And for as much as they've addressed this position again, it's another year going into a season of like, do they have the answers at edge? What do they have at edge? How confident are we in their ability at edge? I will say they're going to be good from a run defense standpoint, which is nice. I just have questions about the pass rush. Because if you're not getting it from Bosa, even if you get it from Rousseau, who else are you getting it from in those first 6 games? Like, there's just, if Bosa misses time, you're really banking on Rousseau taking a jump or Epinesa getting back to what he was in 2023 as a rusher, or you're hoping that Landon Jackson can be something. You're hoping that Javon Solomon can be something. There's just, as I keep speaking, a lot of the word I keep using is hope, and you're just hoping and hoping, and it's just, for such a premium position like edge and how important that position is as a whole versus both the run and the pass, but the questions that they have at pass against the pass as rushers, you would like more of a known quantity and more answers. And they just, again, for another season, don't have it. Seems like they have more questions than answers at edge again for another season, which feels like a recurring theme for this team. Oh, I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did. Look at that. Bob says, Baltimore is to Buffalo as Buffalo is to KC during the playoffs. Ooh. Yeah, that might be fair. Yeah. But it's tough too, just like the Bills to the Chiefs, like both times Baltimore lost to the Bills in the playoffs, like they honestly could have easily won both games, just like the Bills could have won multiple games against Kansas City in the playoffs. Yeah, that's very frustrating. I think Baltimore is to Baltimore in the playoffs, like KC is to Buffalo in the playoffs, meaning like Baltimore is their own, like, The Chiefs have been the Bills' kryptonite in the playoffs. I think Baltimore is their own kryptonite. Like Baltimore just finds a way to screw themselves like every playoff against going back to when they first started it with the horrible performance against Tennessee and then against stuff with Kansas City, stuff with the Bills. They just can't seem to put it all together consistently for one run, no matter how good they may be. Bill says Russo is a Nightwing. Maybe Solomon could be a Batmite. Ooh, wait, are you ranking Nightwing ahead of Robin? I don't know if this is more of a compliment for Russo and you're saying that he's lesser than Robin or above. I'm not. I mean, Nightwing is sick, so I would take Nightwing over Robin. So I would take this as a compliment, but I just want to make sure. But I like where your head's at. Well done, Bill. Yes, the rookies have to contribute. Absolutely, as James says here. Oh, I appreciate you, John. John says like and share and subscribe if on YouTube. Thank you very much for that, John. Yes, if you are joining me here live in this episode and you're enjoying this conversation or this content, or if you're enjoying all the nice hot weather that's finally hit Buffalo, feel free to drop a like on this video. Or if you're just in a good mood or whatever it is, drop a like here on YouTube. Share, subscribe, word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. I appreciate you for that, John. Thank you very much. All right, let's move from edge. Let's go to safety, which, again, a position I've talked about a little bit. Sorry, I'm about to cough. If you last episode, I started coughing like crazy at the end. I don't know what it is about this one again, too. Maybe it's the weather change. I don't know. Safety. 2 questions. One of them significantly more important than the other. I think it's the big question. I think it's a legitimate question to ask who wins the starting safety spots. We've talked about it a bit on the show. I think they want it to be Bishop and Rapp. I'm not going to do too much of the dialogue on this because I've done it before. I just don't. We've talked about it on the show. I don't think Bishop and Rapp are an ideal pair. Even though I would like that to be the starting safety group, in an ideal world for me, I think the starting safety group is Forrest and Bishop. I still don't like Cole Bishop's fit in this Bills defense. I didn't like it when they drafted him. I thought he was going to need more time on task than was initially anticipated or thought by most folks. I still think he'd be a better fit for like the Patriots defense last year, the Ravens defense, or the Cardinals defenses that use 3 safeties, defenses where Cole Bishop can be in the box as a nickel defender, as an off-ball linebacker, as an apex, playing in and around the box, in and around the underneath to the low intermediate to the intermediate itself, and just allowing him to match up on tight ends, running backs, play, sideline to numbers, hash to sideline, and in and around the box as much as possible. The Bills defense, you're not going to get that much because they disguise looks. They like to play a lot of 2 high coverages. You got to play away from the line of scrimmage. You got to process accordingly. I don't think he's there yet. Maybe he will be after a full offseason and more time on task. Hopefully he doesn't get banged up like he did last year. And then Taylor Rapp is their best safety from a processing and vision standpoint. The further away he gets from the line of scrimmage, he just doesn't have the juice and the athleticism and the range to function in a lot of ways that you'd like. Forrest is kind of the best combination of everything. Like he's got some athleticism, he's got some vision, he's got some processing, he can tackle a bit, he can do some different coverage things, single high, 2 high, some man. Then you've got Damar Hamlin, who is just reliable and responsible in a lot of forms and facets. Oh, I'm falling apart. I don't hate the idea of Damar Hamlin starting, but I really don't want to see it. Like, I would much prefer him to be safety 4 and not really see the field. Like, I would take pretty much any other safety combo that doesn't involve him. No disrespect. Give me Bishop and Rapp. Give me Bishop and Forrest. Give me Forrest and Rapp. Give me any of those before I get Damar Hamlin. Again, no disrespect to him. And so then who wins the starting spots? And then by extension, who wins the depth spots? And within that, is Damar Hamlin a lock to make this team? Does Jordan Hancock, the rookie from Ohio State, does he make some noise at safety? Do they see him more as more of a nickel? Can they use him to maximize some roster spots? And can he be like nickel 2, safety 4, special team value, some kind of something somewhere type of guy who can wear a jack of all trades and wear a bunch of hats and save them some roster spots or versatility? I'm very interested to see. And then even factoring within that too, and this is more the nickel discussion tying into safety, Cam Lewis, like is Cam Lewis making this roster again as the backup nickel? We also know he can play some safety. We also know he has some special teams value. Safety is an interesting one, but it really starts with who wins the starting safety spots. I think they want it to be Rapp and Bishop. I think it will be Rapp and Bishop, but I wouldn't be surprised if Derek Forrest makes some noise. And I still don't just like I don't like the pairing of, I don't like Bishop's fit in this defense, and I still have questions about it. That doesn't mean he can't grow to be a fit with the right time on task and development. I would have preferred other guys in that draft, preferred other options or trajectories, I should say, in terms of that development and fit. But I like him as an individual player, and with his skill set, I don't think he's a great pairing with Rapp, considering Rapp's skill set and his traits and his functionality. And it's super annoying to have this conversation with the safety grouping after having years of just being spoiled with Hyde and Poyer and, doing away with the free and strong labels. Although Poyer was geared more towards strong and Hyde was geared more towards free, but both of them could play split coverages. Both of them could play single high. They each could play in and around the box. You could blitz them. They could play in the slot. You could play buzz. You could play sky. You could have them cover the flats. Like, you could play match. You could play man. You could play spot drop. Just, man, yeah, the safety position is frustrating for me. And I want Cole Bishop to live in and around the box as a defender, like playing top down. But that means that Taylor Rapp is going to be your single high post safety a lot of times. And I don't think that makes sense for you. Derek Forrest is a better single high post safety than Taylor Rapp. So it's a frustrating spot for me, I should say, to talk about the safety grouping. I'm a defense guy. I love coverages and talking that and breaking down that aspect of the game. And James says, but we have the safety whisperer with the laughing emoji. That's fair. And that's it too, right? Like, Sean McDermott and this coaching staff have always gotten so much blood out of the DB stone at both corner and safety. So if there was any coaching staff or coach to get the most out of guys at that spot and raise floors and raise ceilings, it is McDermott and this staff. But man, I'm just not excited about the safety position. I think they'll end up being fine, but I do have concerns from a schematic perspective and just how you pigeonhole yourself. Like, do teams know, like, well, they can't really go single high, or we want them to get single high because we know we can win? Or are you confident going single high for the Bills and you don't care who the the post safety is in the single high look because Hairston and Benford are going to be locked down on the outside? Maybe that's what the thought is. That does allow you to do some different things from a coverage perspective. If your corners can live on islands, and then you can start to weaponize your safeties a little bit more and or mitigate their deficiencies. So I do think that is a fair point, but we will see. I'm going to put up the banner for the sponsor of the show, One Pie Pizza. You folks know the drill. The best pizza in Buffalo, New York. I don't say that because they sponsor the show. They sponsor the show because I truly believe One Pie Pizza is the best pizza in all of Buffalo. Sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni. If you get different toppings or veggies or whatever, they chop them all up evenly and then sprinkle them across the pie so you get a good even distribution. They make their own homemade blue cheese, which is absolutely amazing. They also have a catering division called Elevated Catering of Buffalo. I had them do an event for me at the beginning of this month, and it was amazing. Just the mac and cheeses that they had, this chicken and then coconut rice dish with like this salsa and different, my wife ordered it and I told myself to remember what it was. All I remember is that it was delicious and amazing. They just do so many great things at One Pie Pizza. And then the catering division called, again, Elevated Catering of Buffalo. But they also do breakfast pizzas, which are great. If you have not tried some One Pie Pizza, get yourself some One Pie Pizza. The online menu for both and website, I should say as well, can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. That is for both One Pie Pizza and Elevated Catering of Buffalo. So treat your taste buds and your family to some delicious food this summer or whenever you want to go to One Pie or Elevated Catering of Buffalo. And I also want to mention, as I always do, they're really good people making really good food. They do a lot of initiatives and drives for the community and the city of Buffalo and towns and suburbs, and just partnering with Roswell, partnering with the SPCA, Toys for Tots, the Alzheimer's Foundation. They do a lot of good aside from just making really good food. So go check out some One Pie Pizza, or if you're trying to do an event or do some catering stuff. It's summertime. Maybe there's graduation parties. Maybe there's sending people off to college parties. Maybe it's just birthday parties or events you're trying to throw outside and enjoy some park time or some backyard time, whatever. You want some food for it, get One Pie Pizza or Elevated Catering of Buffalo. Pick your poison. It's delicious either way. I'm going to put the banner up that says Toodles, folks, because we're going to start to say goodbye and wind down. If you have not already, please, 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 and thank you. Drop a like on this video here on YouTube. As I mentioned earlier, likes are the lifeblood of these live streams. So if you're watching live now on YouTube, or if you're watching post live on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. If you are not watching on YouTube and you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's very much appreciated too. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on whatever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. Also on YouTube, turn on notifications for the Disguise Coverage playlist. Subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole. We have you covered with a variety of content pretty much across almost every single day of the week, even in the off season, but especially in season. So go check that out in the variety of shows, whatever, your flavor or fancy of Bills content or football content is. We have you covered here at Cover One. If you enjoyed this episode or enjoy this show or me, tell your family, friends, loved ones about the show, about the channel, the brand, anything and everything. I greatly appreciate it. If you hate me or if you hate this episode, that's fine. Tell your enemies about me or this episode or the show and try and make them watch it and ruin their day. If there's anything I didn't get to in this episode, get at me on Twitter at pro__ant. Again, pro2_ANT. At me, message me, DM me, whatever you want. Same thing goes on Blue Sky. The handle there, though, is proant. No underscores, just PROANT. Or if you're a Cover One insider, get at me in the Discord. Best way is to DM me there so I get the notification right away. And yeah, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I know we're again in the doldrums and the lull of this offseason, but we're starting to ramp up a little bit here on the show as we get to training camp. And then once training camp hits, it is a full speed sprint until the end of the Bills season. Appreciate you folks and tuning in. And we'll grab this question real quick from Bill. Bill says, if Max and Benford are locked down, what is the safety concept called that is neither single high nor split? Is that cover zero regardless of blitzing? Cover zero usually is attached to a blitz. Cover zero just essentially means there is no safety help on the back end. Everybody is in man coverage. You have no help over the top. Usually it's accompanied with a blitz. Brian Flores for the Vikings uses a ton of oh my God, what cover zero blitzes. He did the same thing in Miami. But essentially cover zero is, what your structure is on the back end. It just means you have no safety help over the top. So everybody essentially is kind of on an island in some form or fashion with no help over the top. Cover one means you have, one safety back there. Cover two means you have two safeties back there. Cover four references, the two corners on the outside, the two safeties over the top, kind of functioning as the four on the back end. Cover three means you have a single high safety, two corners dropping deep on the outside. Those all refer to kind of the deep help that you have. So cover zero means you have no help over the top. There's nothing. Appreciate that. Good question, Bill. And thank you for everybody who was tuned in live to this episode. I appreciate all the back and forth with each other. Questions for me. It's nice in these episodes where it is kind of, slower time of the year. It's awesome to still see people tune in live and the engagement with myself and each other. So I really appreciate everybody who tuned in live, and I appreciate everyone in general, whatever form or fashion your episode consumption comes in. I am greatly thankful for it and greatly appreciative of it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I'll see you when I see you. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.